before we start the role play, let's take a look at here's some of the things that you probably should just be looking for in the conversation, and hopefully we can model some of them really well, and if we don't, then hopefully we can come up with great ideas of what to do better. But first, just sort of how the conversation itself is framed, how we're how focused is the conversation on the specific student outcomes we want to see change or achieved or whatever. How well am I showing Allison in this conversation, like how we're using the data and why the data is important, as opposed to telling her. We're probably not going to have like visual tracking stuff in front of us except for the tracker itself. And how well I'm adjusting in the conversation towards whatever she's giving me. Information, her needs, her tone, her mannerisms, whatever. You know, the praise, feedback that I give her, ways that I'm checking for understanding, and then investment. So I'm going to take this down, but if you want to sort of copy down notes of what you should be looking for, you might want to do that real quick.
Wait, are you putting something else up?
I'm going to put the tracker up.
Is this the thing you sent up?
Yeah. Someone showed me how to do this. Right?
Kid got 133 on a test.
No, there's some issues with her tracker, so that's part of the conversation her having. There's something wrong. Yeah. She's giving, there's something there, but then there's other things that Sam and I had to lead through that increase the mastery, so we're trying to make sure her tracker is authentic. But thank you, yeah, that's one part of our, that won't be role played right now.
All right, y'all ready? Okay, so thanks, Allison, for meeting with me. You know, it's always good to hang out with you.
Same.
Cool. All right, so I'm glad that we had a chance to talk today, because I'm excited just to figure out where are you towards your vision, and I'm excited to dive into your data and talk about how specific students are doing, tell you about some of the things I saw in your classroom when I was last there, and make some connections, and then talk about what we want to do next to get your kids even closer to where you want them to be. But before we start, can you just sort of like zoom back in your head and think about, you know, that vision that you wrote at the beginning of the year that we haven't really talked as much about as we should have probably, but I want to revisit it now. Like, what are the things that, when you think about where you want your kids to be by the end of the year, what are the things that are the most important for you? Like, how do you want them acting, feeling, thinking? What do you want them to know? Let's make sure we understand what that is.
So, besides the academic things that I want them making the reading growth and mastering content, I really want them to take responsibility and show evidence of being in control and taking responsibility for their learning for now and for the future. That's really big for me, especially in 3rd grade when they're getting closer and closer to the middle school age, that I want them to know kind of that every action has a reaction and they're kind of in control of their destiny.
So you want to see like real owners, these,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for your kids really being owners of their learning and their whole educational experience.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. How are you going to know that they're being the kind of owners that you want them to be?
I think it's like 2 things. I think if I see them in class more on task and following what's happening and knowing and engaging the right way, then that would show that in class that they're taking ownership. And then I think another piece of that would then be that like they know kind of like what their strengths are and what they're working on, so that they're not just taking ownership in class by just following directions or being on task, but that they're actually working really hard towards something that they know what that is, and they know why they're working hard on that thing to fix to then really get better at whatever it is that they're trying to get better at.
Cool. Yeah, we're definitely going to come back to this ownership aspect, Because when we start to talk about individual kids, I'm going to ask you, like, to what degree are we starting to see these particular kids taking ownership of what they're learning? And do they know what they're learning enough to say, you know, here's where I am towards what I need to know? What about academically? What are you trying to achieve here this year?
So, I mean, I think first it's just getting them to just master the learning goals. I mean, I'm trying to make things a little bit more rigorous so I can really see if they're understanding by explaining, but really I'm trying to get them to just master third grade math learning goals and standards. And with reading, I'm trying to make the growth that I need, but I'm also really trying to focus on how to teach reading the right way, where I'm sometimes not sure I'm doing that. And I also I haven't finished giving the DRA the second time around, so I'm not even 100% sure where my students are and the growth that I've made and what's contributed to that. So those are like the things right now where I'm trying to figure out and fix so that I can better know those things.
Okay, so you know we're going to talk about literacy in our next conversation, but I did want to highlight the fact that in order for us, in order for your kids to really have the kind of ownership that you want them to have, right, you're going to have complete DRA data so that they can know where they are towards your literacy growth goals. So let's make sure that happens before our next conversation. And if you need help finishing that or figuring out what to do, let's talk about that at the end of today. But I want to spend most of today's conversation focusing on the math data that you have in front of you, because that's the lesson I saw, and that's what we've been talking about more as of late. And I want to zoom out and think, what about math? Like, what are the things that you know you want to see your kids doing in math that's going to make you feel like your kids are being set up to be on a different trajectory? So mastering the learning goals for sure, I think that's a part of it. What are the other things that you're like, my kids have to be able to do these kinds of things?
Well, sometimes I don't know because the planning, I'm not always sure what my students are supposed to get out of every day. I get these plans from the teacher next to me, and Matt, Claire, and I both are at the same school, and we both teach third grade, and a third teacher does the math plans. But then, like, I create the assessment, and I pull it from, like, other third grade teachers and Teach for America that I know to make a strong assessment. And so sometimes I'm confused on, based on what I'm getting and what I think they're supposed to get, what I actually believe that they're supposed to end every single day knowing and being able to do, and then assessing it in a way that is actually matching it. And I'm finding that because I get these plans and then I have this assessment and I don't see how they're connected sometimes, and I sometimes am just not even sure what I want them to be able to do or what I think they're supposed to be able to do. So that's one thing. I think the other thing, and something I'm starting to do a lot more, and I know you saw in my classroom, is that I'm really trying to get them to explain and explain how they're getting their answers and how they're solving their problems. But again, like, because I'm getting these other plans and these other assessments, it's not always in the plans, and so I don't always know how to do that with the plans that I have, and so sometimes it doesn't feel like it's effective and that they're actually explaining what I think they're supposed to be explaining.
Okay. So these two things we will come back to in this conversation today. The first piece of, like, how are you aligning the way you're assessing and planning in a meaningful way to the things that you want your kids to know and understand, and then the second piece of, like, you really want your kids to be able to explain their answers, and, like, I think I'm hearing sort of, like, explain the critical thinking or the problem solving that's going on behind their answers. So when we dig into your data where you have, like, the word problems, lessons, and stuff like that is concerned, I want to talk more specifically there about how we can build your kids' skill to do that. Okay, so let's pause here. We're going to do a timeout for the group. We're going to do a, what did we call it? Bubble? Think bubble, yeah.
Pop-up video.
Pop-up video.
Bubble.
Pop-up bubble, that's where we go. We're going to dive back into this conversation in just a second, but I want to pause because at this point, I've just sort of basically framed the conversation, and I've framed how we want to think about the pieces of our vision that are important. There were probably things that I did in this part that were helpful to set us up for that. There were probably things that I didn't do that we need to pull out. So I want us to pause and, like, let's talk whole group for a second. What were some of the things that, when you think about what I had up on the screen, and I'll put it back up now, principles of a strong co-investigation to, like, really start to get core members to understand how to use data in a meaningful, authentic way, and, like, start to move core members? What were some of the things that I was doing well? What were some of the things that you would have liked to see us do or see me do? And then we'll get ready to dive back into the conversation.